ahead and get started. I do first want to ask the group present, virtually as well as here in person. It's important to us working through the sustainability series that we understand how you guys are receiving your information. So if you could show just by raising your hand, how many of you found out about this event through the newsletter from Yellowstone Twin Cities? Perfect. And how many of you found out through ISWR newspaper advertising, other sources, press releases? Great. It's important for us to understand how we're connecting with our community. So I do want to thank everyone for attending this sustainability series hosted by Teton County Integrated Solid Waste and Recycling. My name is Becky Kiefer, and I'm the Waste Diversion Outreach Coordinator for ISWR. And with me today is Kyle McDonald. He is our contractor from Tri-Hydro Corporation. I also want to take a brief moment to thank my partners in the sustainability series, Yellowstone Teton Clean Cities, in particular, Bailey Collins, for all of your help and support, as well as Energy Conservation Works. We will have about 10 to 15 minutes, hopefully, at the end of this presentation to field a few questions. So if you wouldn't mind holding any of those until the end, we'd be happy to answer them to the best of our ability. So today we are going to be zeroing in on zero waste, which will include a focus on what zero waste is and why zero waste. We're going to take a look at the results from our 2022 Waste Characterization Study, what ISWR is doing now and in the imminent future, as well as take a look at community involvement and accountability as it applies to living in a zero waste community. I want to start by asking who in attendance is in favor of zero waste. Raise your hand. Seems like a silly question to pose, and I presume that most people here would raise their hands in support. But that is because as a collective, our goal is not to create excess waste. It isn't something that we're trying to achieve. Rather, it is a byproduct of the social norms and daily conveniences that we have accepted. I do want to touch on landfilling for a brief moment. It is a component of zero waste. The next slide is an illustration of a century of American garbage, and is going to illustrate the size and current status of landfill provided by the EPA. Lit up like Christmas. As you can see, in the early 70s, the quantity and size of landfills began to exponentially increase, revealing where landfills sprung up in response to population growth. There are a couple of concerning points about landfills, in particular their capacities, which has laid the ground for our work on the road to zero waste concept. Landfills are engineered or designed for storage. They are not engineered for decomposition. Teton County had an active landfill up until this was a tram ticket from the winter season of 81-82. When we did our waste excavation project in 2008, this was discovered. It was not laminated at the time. Although it does look like it has been in a scrapbook for the last 27 years, as opposed to being in an active landfill. So this is an example. Not decomposing. Also, the average landfill's lifespan is only 30 to 50 years. And according to US EPA estimates, in the last 85 years, an estimated 1,500,000 acres of landfill have been lost to the US to active and closed landfills. And that is more than the entire landmass of the state of Rhode Island. So what do we do when we run out of space? Here is a visualization also provided by the EPA of the impact of our waste. This showcases the daily and yearly trash production based on the average American. Simply put, we have to face up to the fact that we are creating a problem with every item that we purchase, use, and throw away. While Teton County recognizes that 100% zero waste is hardly possible, focusing on getting closer to zero is doable. The good news is zero waste doesn't have to be all or nothing. As many of you know, in 2014, Teton County adopted the Road to Zero Waste resolution, which identified a goal to reduce our waste from landfill to 60% by year 2030. And over the last decade, ISWR has been hovering around the 30% range. Teton County stopped using landfills, as I had mentioned previously, in the early 80s. And since then, we have been transferring and trucking our trash to surrounding landfills. We currently truck our trash over to Bonneville County or Idaho Falls. And during the summer months, an average of 6 semi trucks averaging 22 tons makes this route 6 days out of the week. This is unsustainable. So there are some guiding principles for zero waste. Number one, making zero waste a key priority, simply put. Focus first on using less and then diverting more. Support this work through local business development. The Sustainable Business Leaders is a beautiful example of that. And today we're going to take a closer look on the last bullet point, which is sustain this work through cultural change. We cannot manage what we do not measure. If we don't measure the specific components of our trash, then we don't know how we are doing as a community. We don't know what we are doing well or what we are doing poorly, what needs our attention, and what is considered a priority. So in 2022, ISWR partnered with Tri-Hydro to perform a waste characterization study of Teton County's waste mass. We asked that they performed 2 audits, one in the summer and one in the winter, to capture the variable visitor targets, as well as compare industrial waste versus household waste. So we've invited Kyle McDonald here today to present on the results and the findings of the waste audit. So I'm going to turn it over to Kyle. He's going to come out of these speakers here, so hopefully you all can hear him well.
Yep. Hello, everyone. And I'll hold my microphone as close as I can, so hopefully that sounds okay. Yeah, thumbs up. Okay. All right, great. Well, thanks everyone for having me here. I'm sorry I can't join in person. Currently down in Laramie for a training, but really happy to be here to present to you. So this will be the results of the waste characterization study. Here's a quick overview of what we'll cover. We'll first start off just with some sort of background information, set the stage for waste generation in Teton County, and set the stage for our waste characterization study. We'll briefly cover the current MSW management in Teton County, and then we'll get into the method and results for the waste characterization study. Next slide. So this slide is, the purpose of this slide is really just to set the stage, like I said. In Teton County, we have a rural community, and as Becky just mentioned, we don't landfill to dispose of any of our waste in Teton County, and so that creates a fairly unique characteristic when compared to the rest of the country. But there are other variables that are going on that really do create dynamic characteristics in terms of waste generation. And so the images on this slide are just here to sort of help illustrate that. And so we have in the top, that bar chart is a figure taken from the Chamber of Commerce indicator report from 2020, and it's just showing the effective overnight, estimated overnight visitors by season. And this is just an illustration to get at the effective population swings that we see in Teton County. So the light blue bars are showing the overnight visitor for the summer season, And the dark blue bars are showing the effective visitor for the winter season, and the orange is the shoulder seasons. And what we see is, this almost 360% increase in the summer season relative to our shoulder seasons. And of course, that's associated with the nearly 4 million seasonal residents and visitors that come through the town of Jackson. The image in the lower corner there is taken from Shacks on Racks. They're a local entity that help relocate buildings that are destined for demolition. And what they've done is they've plotted the demolition permits for the town of Jackson. I think this is over the course of a couple of years, but it's just an illustration of the substantial amount of construction and demolition activities that we have ongoing in the county. And for us that live and work in Jackson, we know these things to be true, but they're just here to illustrate this, and they really combine to create this very dynamic characteristic in terms of waste generation in the county. Next slide. So this slide is showing historical municipal solid waste composition. This data was collected by Teton County ISWR. It's based on their fiscal year and has been presented in their annual reports over the past 2 decades. The dark gray bars are showing the total MSW as measured at the transfer station scale house and the recycling center scales. The light gray bars, the smaller ones, are showing the total diverteds. And so that includes both the recycling center and transfer station diverteds. And the line plots are showing the individual components thereof. So the red line is showing the landfilled mass. The black line is showing our diverted mass at the transfer station. That's things like clean concrete, mattresses, et cetera. And the green line is showing our recycling center diverteds. And so what we see here is this generally increasing trend over time of total MSW generation. No real surprise there. As population increases, so will our MSW. And what we see also is generally consistent diversion rate over the last 10 years, certainly since 2014, arguably since maybe 2008 even, and that's hovered right around 29% to 34%. The last plot here in the on this graph is for 2022. It's approximate. It doesn't exactly fit with this data presented here perfectly, as it's not based on the fiscal year. This is the projections that we made based on our 2022 Waste Characterization Study. I'm sure that ISWR has the fiscal year data to match in here at this point, but it's put up here just to show that we're generally on trend to stay within these trends that we've seen. Next slide. So looking at the MSW management, this pie chart here is showing the average from 2010 to 2021 of that data that we were just looking at, and what the average composition looks like. And so over that time period, we landfilled about 71% of the total MSW that came through the transfer station and recycling center, and about 9% of that total MSW was recyclables that were processed through the recycling center, and about 20% were diverteds that were diverted at the transfer station. So again, our mulchables and compostables, our C&D, debris, tires, refrigeration units, mattresses, carcasses. And this circle off to the side, this is our community diversions. And this is an important thing to note here. I think it's worth spending just a little bit of time to discuss, because when we talk about that goal of 60% diversion for the county, we're not really capturing the whole picture when we're talking about just the mass of waste that are quantified at the recycling center and the transfer station. Our community has a substantial amount of diversions that are occurring. People that are doing DIY composting or their own recycling, their reuse efforts such as the Habitat for Humanity Restore or Shacks on Racks, and also reduce efforts that are ongoing. And so, these are really hard to quantify and very hard to get that whole picture. But when we talk about hovering around a 30% diversion over the last decade, we're not really talking about the whole picture for Teton County. And so, it's an important differentiation to make here. Next slide, please. So getting into the waste characterization study and the methods. So Tri-Hydro was hired by Teton County ISWR to perform this waste characterization study. We performed 2 5-day sorting events, one in the winter and one in the summer, again, designed to be representative of the tourism months. That was about 4.5 days spent at the transfer station and about a half day spent at the recycling center. We generally followed the ASTM procedures for the characterization of unsorted municipal solid waste. And in those 2 events, we manually sorted through about 11,000 pounds of MSW and about 600 pounds of recycling contaminants. Am I coming through still okay, Rebecca? Yeah? Okay.
You're okay.
Okay, good. And so those contaminants were manually sorted into 52 categories, and that was broken up by 10 major categories and 52 subcategories that were defined by Teton County ISWR in their request for proposal. And so these photos are showing some of the sorting event at the transfer station. This is the top photo is our equipment operator pulling off a representative aliquot from an offloaded haul to the transfer station, coning and quartering it, and then we'd pull it aside and manually sort it there on our tarp line tables into tiered bins. Next slide, please. So getting into results, this pie chart here is kind of showing the summary of all the data that was collected. This is showing the average composition of waste at the transfer station for both the winter and summer event, and this is broken out by the 10 major waste components. And you might notice the big slice of the pie that jumps off there are these C and D type wastes. 33% of the total composition of municipal solid waste hitting the transfer station tipping floor. So a very large component there of these C and D type wastes. That's followed then by paper, organics, and plastics at about 15% to 19%. All other of the 10 major waste categories comprise less than 10% of the total composition individually. Next slide. We can break this up even further and look at the composition with a little bit more in depth. And so this chart is showing several things here. It's kind of busy, so I'll try and walk you through here. The 2 bar charts on the far right are the average for both this winter and summer event individually. Those 2 combine to show the pie chart that we saw on the previous page. The 4 bar charts on the left of the chart here are breaking that down even further. So we have our winter and summer events, but broken up by the type of hauler bringing waste to the transfer station. And so we have this divided by the private haulers, which are defined as private residential or private businesses hauling from a single location. So this includes here our private contractors, our roofing contractors and the like. And then our commercial haulers, and these are our solid waste collection entities. Our West Bank Sanitation or Yellow Iron, who are typically hauling from one or multiple locations. And when we break up the data like that, we see a pretty substantially different composition of waste. So our commercial haulers, when we look at just the commercial haulers, the C and D type wastes are about 9% of the overall composition. Whereas when we compare that to the private haulers, we're looking at about 55% of the waste composition is the C and D type wastes. And for the commercial haulers, I think if you flip to the next slide here, Becky. For the commercial haulers, then when that C and D type waste is reduced, we see that the paper, plastic, and organics then become the primary components of the waste composition. Next slide, please. So this slide is showing the Teton County waste characterization data as compared to US EPA national averages for waste composition. And so in 2018, the EPA published their national average data, and that data is shown in the black bars for each of these components. The blue and orange bars are showing the Teton County waste characterization data. And the solid bars, blue and orange, are for the blue being for the winter events and orange being for the summer event. The solid bars are showing the total composition, and the hashed mark bars are showing the composition of from commercial haulers only. And generally what we see here is that we are fairly consistent with the national averages. It's important to note that for the purposes of this comparison, the categories that we collected had to be reorganized because the subcategories that we sorted into for the Teton County study were different from the categories of waste that the EPA used for their study. And so, you know, things like rubber and leather, you'll see on this figure, you know, this figure would indicate that rubber and leather isn't produced in municipal solid waste at Teton County. But we just did not have rubber and leather for our for categories for the Teton County study, and so those would have been classified in the miscellaneous inorganic wastes. But generally, we were able to recategorize to make this comparison, and so we do see that we're generally similar with the national averages, with a few major exceptions. You'll see that the other category here includes Teton County's C and D type wastes, and so we have quite a bit higher composition than was seen from the national averages. We also see quite a bit lower in the yard trimmings category, and that's attributable to a couple of things. One, being a rural community, yard trimmings are in large part able to be handled on people's individual properties, whereas, you know, if this were an urbanized setting, you know, all those yard wastes would be you know, typically sent to a waste collection facility. But also, ISWR has a yard trimmings operations that can handle these yard trimmings, you know, through composting and mulching. The 2018 national average diverted rate was 38.2%, and as we mentioned before, Teton County's diversion rate has hovered around that 30%. So we're falling a little bit short of the national average as measured at our transfer station scale house and the recycling center, but we're doing very good for a rural community, it should be noted. Next slide, please. So this slide is where things really get interesting, and we're looking here at the target divertible wastes in the transfer station MSW, the MSW that's hitting the transfer station tipping floor and being sent off for landfilling. And we define target divertible wastes here as wastes that could be handled or diverted through ongoing Teton County ISWR operations. And so we have our target recyclables. These are aluminum cans, corrugated cardboard, number 1 and number 2 plastics, et cetera. Wastes that, recyclables that we have current operations that can divert those. Target compostables and mulchables, you know, these are wastes that are entering the transfer station tipping floor that are being landfilled that could be handled through our composting and mulching processes. And other target transfer station divertibles, clean concrete, mattresses, scrap metal, electronics, et cetera, things that we have operations currently in place that could handle these wastes. And when combined, we see about 41% of the total MSW that is being landfilled at the Teton County transfer station is comprised of those target divertible wastes. That's estimated to be about 14,000 tons annually. So a very large amount here. This really represents an opportunity at the community level, because importantly, these wastes, once they hit the transfer station tipping floor, it's likely too late to be diverted through these existing programs for multiple reasons. One being that these are likely too contaminated. Those recyclables are likely too contaminated to be sold to the secondary markets and processed. Also, the sheer amount of labor and costs would be prohibitive to sort through those wastes at the transfer station tipping floor and get them to their appropriate diversion channels. And so this really does represent opportunity at the community level, at public outreach, but it is substantial here. Next slide. So we're moving here on to the results of the Recycling Center Waste Characterization Audit. And for the purposes of the Recycling Center Waste Characterization Study, we had to modify the ASTM standard, which was for unsorted municipal solid waste. At the Recycling Center, we have source separated and screened waste streams coming through. And so we relied on the Recycling Center operations and sorted through their contaminant streams to get overall contamination rates. Trihydro sorted through the corrugated cardboards, the number 1 and number 2 plastics, and the aluminum can waste recycling stream contaminants. And this plot here is showing the contamination rates. And what we see is very low contamination rates for corrugated cardboard and aluminum cans. And in fact, that aluminum can number at 6.2% is actually much lower in reality. The 6.2% included crushed can aluminum pucks, which were put out in the contamination stream from the first pass through the ISWR's new robotic sorting system, and those are removed in a second screening process. So the aluminum can contamination rate was really 1.3% when accounting for that. For the number 1 and number 2 plastics, we're showing our winter sorting event contamination rate and our summer sorting event contamination rate here. We're also showing a volumetric contamination rate, which is data that was collected by ISWR over about a year and a half. And we'll get into that data in just a minute, but we have them all plotted here just to show that we have 3 measurements of contamination on these 2 recycling streams, and they all generally agree. We see about a 33% contamination rate in the number 1 plastics and about a 27% contamination rate in the number 2 plastics. Next slide. So these plots are showing the volumetric number 1 and number 2 contamination data that I discussed. So this is our volumetric data between December 2020 and February 2022 for number 1 and number 2 plastics. The light gray area is showing the total volumetric, the total volume for those recycling streams as they're brought to the recycling center. The dark black area, darker gray area is showing the contamination volume, so the contaminants that are removed from the recycling stream. And the black line is showing the contamination rate for these 2 streams over time. What we see is summer peaks in the total volume of these 2 recycling streams, 2 and 3 times the total volume come through the recycling center for these 2 recycling streams in the summer months relative to the rest of the year. But we see a generally consistent contamination rate, percent contamination in these 2 recycling streams, despite those changes. And what we saw in the data from our sorting event was that the contamination in the number 1 and number 2 plastics was primarily composed of other plastic materials. That includes number 1 and number 2 plastic materials that are otherwise not recyclable in these streams. So they're either contaminated too far to be sellable on the secondary market, or they are lesser number 1 and number 2 plastics, such as number 1 PET thermoform clamshell containers, which are not recyclable with our number 1 PET plastics. And so, this is somewhat of a difficult distinction to make at the community level, and people often get confused because that plastic does say, number 1 plastic on it. But next slide, please. So Trihydro did pull secondary market evaluation data for Teton County, and it was included in our final report. The secondary markets were, I think there were 10 secondary markets across North America that we pulled value ranges, indices for, and we projected out tonnages for those target recyclables, that 41% target recyclable, really as a reference point for Teton County. And so this table is showing the projected annual tonnage of the various target recyclables in currently landfilled waste at Teton County and secondary market value ranges. Importantly, these value ranges are really just for reference. They don't include consideration for contamination or for sorting or transportation or anything like that. But there is significant opportunity in those target recyclables that are currently being landfilled. I have one other bullet here that is just referencing back to those #1 PET thermoform plastic containers that are removed as contaminants from our #1 plastic recycling stream. That's projected out to be about 38 tons of #1 PET clamshell containers that are taken out of a recycling stream as a contaminant and brought to the transfer station and landfilled currently. And so there's an opportunity here for diversion. The secondary market for #1 PET plastics is not great. So there's some cost benefit discussion there, but we did think it was an important opportunity there to point out. I think that covers, is another slide, Becky, or is that my last one? Okay, I think that covers the summary of the waste characterization study. There was a lot of data collected, and there's a lot more that can be looked at with the data, but this is really the high-level overview. So with that, I'll hand it back. I'll take any questions, I guess, at the end also, right, Becky? Okay, great, thanks.
Thank you, Kyle. Thank you for your expertise today. As Kyle mentioned, we'll field some questions. You all have some questions for him. Field those at the end. And if anyone is interested in the full 2022 waste audit report, it is on our website. And I'm also happy to, if you connect with me, I'm happy to email it to you directly as well. It is available for public. So the waste characterization study provided ISWR with a clear profile on the materials we need to focus on: construction and demolition, organics, paper, and plastics, so we can clearly evaluate our department's next steps in policy programming, education, and outreach. But I want to take a moment to focus on the community involvement as it relates to the waste characterization study. As Kyle mentioned, based on the target divertible wastes that we found in the trash transfer station, Teton County could reach a 40% diversion rate without adding any additional programming or passing any regulations, policy, ordinances. And that, in my opinion, is very telling. ISWR's role within Teton County is to provide and coordinate strategies to reduce waste and continue to move the needle on the overall diversion rate for Teton County. As Kyle pointed out, that including community diversions, which are diversion efforts that are already occurring in the community that aren't accounted for in ISWR's tonnages, would be of significant value. And that is something that we intend to do moving forward. Some examples Kyle already mentioned of those efforts include Shacks on Racks, Whole Food Rescue, and Habitat for Humanity's Restore. By quantifying these community diversions, this will help us quantify the whole picture, including industrial and commercial diversion efforts. And this is something, again, that we plan to do. Other projects that ISWR is currently working on is draft pay-as-you-throw ordinance language in coordination with the town of Jackson, additional composting infrastructure, which is a grant that we provided or that we received through the USDA, the requirement of diversion of construction and demolition materials, as well as researching the economics and market availability for new recycling commodity capture. Our work is nowhere near done, and we are constantly reevaluating and adding new infrastructure and programming. Also, ISWR recognizes that there needs to be more producer responsibility and accountability, but we as a municipality and community cannot rely on industry or for-profit driven businesses to have our best interest in mind. I also want to take a moment to recognize that nearly everyone in this room in attendance is part of our choir. But Moving forward, our programming is only as effective as the number of people utilizing those services and programs available. So what services and programs are available to the general public? ISWR offers traditional recycling in Teton County at 7 community recycling sites located throughout the county, and those also service commuter communities. The sentiment I hear most working at ISWR is where I'm from, I can recycle blah, 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 fill in the blank. And we recognize that what is accepted here in Teton County, it varies from community to community. And that is due to markets, transportation, community size and location, so rural versus urban, and funding. There are rumors that recycling is broken, and I would like to challenge that. Here in Teton County, we do recycle everything that we ask the community for. So if it's posted on our signs, it is getting recycled. And recycling is not the end all be all solution, as we will discuss further. The majority of our waste diversion efforts by weight occur down at the trash transfer station, where we collect scrap metal, mattresses, automobile and bike tires, as well as concrete. And we have an extensive compost operations at the trash transfer station as well, where we accept yard waste, pasture manure, dimensional lumber, and food waste. We also accept food waste at the recycling center for residents in a 5-gallon bucket for a nominal fee. So if you weren't aware of that, that is something that we are providing to our community. According to our Waste Characterization Study, organics make up about 1/4 of what we're finding in the trash, which is particularly important to keep out of landfills where it generates methane. Methane is a greenhouse gas that's about 25 times more potent than carbon dioxide, and therefore it has the greatest environmental impact for diversion. Yet, as I just pointed out, most of the focus from today so far has been on recycling and waste diversion infrastructure. We want to bring the focus to the role of the individual to allow those systems to work and to cultivate a stewardship behavior. This table showcases a shift in perspective and thinking towards zero waste, moving away from diversion and taking a more holistic approach in the stewardship behavior. One of my favorite examples up here is, and rather than asking, can we recycle it here? We can be asking, do we need it? Are there alternatives? So just shifting that focus of what do I do with this item at the end of its lifespan and reevaluating, do I need it from the beginning? We want the public to broaden their view of what zero waste behavior means. Again, there's a lot of focus on the end use issues and solutions, recycling and composting, but the biggest community opportunity for benefit really relies upstream, where we make decisions around purchasing and consumption habits, and there's a lot less focus on that. So let's take a look at recycling for an example. The message about recycling is so positive that it nearly becomes an incentive to consider that recyclable waste isn't really waste, but it is. Some people dare to ask if recycling is actually promoting additional consumption and therefore additional waste with clean conscience. Yet after 50 years of our recycling, our country as a whole is only at about a 35% recycling rate. Instead of considering recycling as the main solution, we should think about whether we need to be consuming at all. Zero waste is less about increasing and adding technology and policy and more about changing behavior. And the reality is reduction is the long-term solution. These pictures are examples of what reduction can look like. So by reducing, we stop the problem at the source, making less waste to begin with, which means that there's less waste to manage. Reduce doesn't always have to mean the absence of consumption. I want to broaden the scope of what reduction can look like on a tangible daily basis. So reusables are a great reduction opportunity. Local municipalities can easily set rules on waste sorting, collection, and recycling targets, which ISWR does. But it's far harder for us to put in place policy to reduce the amount of stuff that people buy that they don't really need. So as a government agency, we tend to have more policy influence on recycling than on waste prevention. There is one caveat. I will say that the plastic bag reduction ordinance is the first example of a municipal ordinance targeting the use of reusables and ultimately behavior change. Repairing what we already have is also another great way to reduce. So by repairing items, we also support local tradesmen and women. Habitat for Humanity used to host a repair cafe. I'm not quite sure if that's still functioning, but that was a great opportunity for people to bring their items in and have skilled people help them to repair. I personally take my clothing and boots to a cobbler to have repaired rather than tossing them away. So just taking that opportunity to cultivate a mindset and intent to repair rather than just send things to the trash that are in a condition that is deteriorating or not ideal. And then sharing is another method of reduction, in my opinion. I remember when I first moved to Jackson, I was invited to a lot of clothing swaps. So people would get together and have a potluck using local food sources, and we would just exchange household goods and clothing. And I found that as a newbie in town to be really beneficial. Since I moved here with 2 suitcases, that was really valuable. But we can do that on a daily basis. There's also other opportunities. There's a lot of local Facebook groups, not just to buy, but also to trade at no cost. So just taking those opportunities to reduce. To conclude, here is a zero waste hierarchy. I would like for everyone here today to focus on the rethink, redesign, the reduce, reuse portion of the diagram and how you can implement those philosophies into your daily life. Because ISWR does have limiting factors to the second part of the diagram, which includes recycling and composting, material recovery, and landfilling. Some of those limitations include, what I mean is, sorry. There's a lack of services in the marketplace, meaning that everything that is created and manufactured is not intended to be recycled. So us thinking that recycling and composting alone can get us to our goals on zero waste isn't the option. It's not going to happen. Also, lack of infrastructure. Teton County has made a lot of really important infrastructure improvements over the last 10 years. Just saying that out loud feels like an understatement, but there's still room for improvement. And a lot of that is based on budget. As an enterprise fund operating within the county, we are responsible for securing the revenue to cover our operations and our capital improvement costs. So budget is a limiting factor. Also, as a county department, it's tricky for us to pass ordinances through the entire county. And we rely heavily on our close and important relationship and partnership with the town of Jackson. And then there's the public perception around policy, which is a whole other sustainability series. So I wanted to close with this cheeky little ad that came out. It was produced by ISWR about 8 years ago. And it says, even nice families talk trash. Let's talk about reduce, reuse, recycle, and composting and with your community members. Let's discuss creative ideas to implement those philosophies. Let's discuss why it's important for you and why it's important for our community. We want the public to broaden their view of what zero waste behavior means, and on what a personalized daily basis, the biggest opportunity towards zero waste really lies upstream, where we make decisions around purchasing and consumption habits. So I do have a simple poll here for the live audience. These questions may seem relatively elementary for those who are present, but what I want you to consider are what are the barriers for either yourself or your family, your neighbors, your coworkers, the community at large for participating in services and programs provided. So take a second to think. I'm actually going to try to make this poll live for virtual attendees. And I'm epically failing, but that's okay. So for those of you who are here, what do you think the barriers are for organics composting? Right, please raise your hand if you think it's too expensive. Do you consider it to not be convenient? Either. To consider for ourselves, or if we don't participate, what are the barriers for our community members? So I'm seeing a lot of hands for it's considered to not be convenient. How many of you don't know your options or you feel uninformed? How many just don't believe in it? There is no judgment here, by the way. No judgment. What about other? Are there other barriers that you perceive to be for food waste or organics composting? Yeah. So what I'm hearing, and for those who are attending virtually, is that it's currently the infrastructure capacity. Perhaps this individual is specifically for event food waste composting, and that those resources aren't quite available at that capacity right now. Great. What about recycling? What do you think are the barriers, either for yourself or the perceived barriers for the rest of the community? Is it perceived not convenient? Are we looking for curbside? Is that what would make it more convenient? You don't know your options or you feel uninformed? How many of you don't believe in recycling? I won't look. What about other? For you? The large blue recycling containers are not available for purchase through ISWR. It would be up to the individual or on an individual label. Or here we are. I would think that, you know, as a rural community, our shopping options are limited. But I want to pose a caveat that why does it have to be a blue bin with the recycling label on the side?
You're really. You know, black part of the computer, and the infrastructure is not to reinforce that material. What I'm taking away from is the community level. Like, can't have one person putting recycling of thousands of people. Partly because there's no there, but again, it's promoting the balance that once everything is illegal, that you can then separate that out. You know, since we have this so many recycling and doing everything, and contamination rates have skyrocketed. And when you take everything out of the ISWR, you know, those bins are separate for a reason. You know, adding glass to cardboard doesn't recycle your glass. It's the cardboard. You know, I went through that we kind of make that. What we have done in our and what we're trying to do in our business is to reuse the packaging of the material up then as the support. You know, I work at Melbourne, and we make a lot of plastic bags. A lot of what we prepare our balls with. Yeah, they're great for putting that stuff back into it. You know, going and buying a recycling bin with people recycling, never even kind of the bin is just another thing of plastic that's maybe just out there. It's not one bin in the recycling goes into it. It's that, you know, 10 subcategories of things that you're recycling.
Thank you. So lastly, I do want to open up the forum to questions, but I want to pose one more question. You can answer it if you'd like, or just take it home to chew on. But how else do you believe can we achieve our goal of 60% diversion by 2030? And with that, yes, ma'am.
They're actually aluminum and metal. People have to know without a doubt the public safety magnet, and get that information out there, stick it on the side of the attach magnet to the recycling bin so that people can test and see, because that contamination rate will go down and which stops people, you know. I don't know what to do with all that.
Right.
And I've seen that happen. Also, we need a better area. We have pretty good availability.
And I don't disagree with you. I think that education, you know, a program is only as good as the people that know about it. That I believe that to my core. And so education and outreach is of the utmost importance. I love your idea of attaching. So for those of you who didn't know, aluminum is not magnetic. Tin and steel is. So even if you are drinking a can that has a lovely label on the side of it indicating that it was coconut water, I bet a magnet will stick to it, and therefore it is tin or aluminum. So that we've got those little tricks like that. But I also agree that food waste composting, we are working on improving the infrastructure around that, because as the waste audit identified, that is a huge, huge target. And it generates methane. So the environmental impacts on getting that out of the landfill is of the utmost importance. Does anyone have any more questions? Yeah, Kelly.
What is recyclable? Why we have to categories is so important because the way that it's done. The worst part about it is that people think that they're recycling. Because they have recycling bin in the end of the law of California, but everything they put in that argue with me. It's, oh no, but it's not like no one's up.
Right.
So I think are but it's just you know, application people into the what is often frustrating. Just doing those sorting.
And the wish cycling is real. That's what we refer to as, I have a yogurt container and it has the chasing arrows on the bottom. And although the nice folks at the recycling center don't have that on their sign, I bet they really want it. I bet they actually do want it. I know that I was guilty of doing that when I first moved to the Valley. But after working with ISWR, you know, we have a floor staff of 6. Prior to our sort system, we sorted everything by hand. And ultimately those items, our end market doesn't want them. And that's why we don't accept them. So. Mm-hmm. It is not.
Okay.
It is not. Yep. So, yeah, paperboard at this point in time is still a landfill bound material. It is not accepted for recycling here in Teton County. And at this point in time, we aren't incorporating in our composting programs anything outside of organics. So. To the back, I believe, and Kyle, was the paperboard in the target divertibles, the 40%, was paperboard included in the organic category or was it excluded?
No, not, it was not included in the target divertibles. We did have a category for paperboard in the waste characterization sort, so that data, we have that data on exactly what that composition is, but it was not included in the target divertibles because that's not currently, a divertible in current ISWR operations.
Thanks for clarifying, Kyle. Yeah, we've got some more questions in the back. Yes. That we love acronyms. Oh man, you give us a chance to make an acronym and we'll make it. OCC stands for Old Corrugated Cardboard. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. So we have a new sort system at the recycling, and it operates with a magnet and eddy current to mechanically separate aluminum from tin and steel. And so what a puck is when we absolutely smash our aluminum cans to the point that they're about this thin. Our system is identifying those as contaminants. It's not the eddy current isn't kicking them out of the system and identifying them as aluminum. And so that's what Kyle pointed to, that our crew then does a second sort on the refuse from the aluminum cans and pulls it. So we are in the process getting to know our new machinery and troubleshooting through some of those issues. Yes. Yeah.
Was it before COVID that we had? I
Right.
can't get back to, oh, I think it's.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's, I kind of touched on that for a brief moment, that as of right now, manufacturers and big corporations truly don't have our best intention in mind, right? So we have to, right. And so my take is think globally, act locally. As corny as that sounds, we have a specific goal here in Teton County. So it's having those conversations with your local pharmacy. It's having those conversations with your local grocery store. It's telling them, hey, I want this to be delivered to me in this capacity. Is that available? Because I think that going, I don't have the phone number to Johnson & Johnson. So I think that we think globally and act locally. And I don't know if there is a list that you kind of proposed where we can kind of issue and ask these big corporations to make changes. I'm not sure. I agree. Yeah, no, it does. It leaves us feeling, I don't want to say hopeless, because the message today is let's think about what we do on a daily basis. But when on a daily basis, our options feel limiting, it's frustrating. It feels really frustrating. And so I'm happy to stick around afterwards and discuss that. That'd be great. I do want to take a moment to thank everyone for being here today. If you are interested in further engagement or involvement, just know the ISWR has an advisory board. Our next meeting is on March the 2nd. The public is welcome. We also have a lot of committees where your voices can be heard, your ideas can be heard, and we can kind of make those grassroots changes. So the public is absolutely welcome to participate on any of those committees that we have available. So thank you all so much. My contact information is here. I'll stick around, but if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to give me a call or an email. And thank you, Kyle, for being here.